Today on Weekend Welder, we're going to continue our introduction to welding. We're going to use some basic materials to make these two projects. All this coming up on Weekend Welder. Hi, I'm Ben McCall, the Weekend Welder. Today we're going to continue working with some basic materials like these, and we're going to make this plant stand and this wine rack. This is our next beginner level project, the plant stand. All of the materials that we used in it are generally available in most hardware stores in 4-foot lengths. Let's go over what we used. We started with 2 pieces of 1/2-inch angle, 8 pieces of 3/16 round, and 3 pieces of 5/16 round. To get started, we cut our angles in half to give us our 24-inch legs. We cut some 5/16 in half for this piece here, and some pieces to 12 inches for our cross pieces. We then cut all of our 3/16 rounds to 24 inches to make up our top grid. Once we had all of our pieces cut, we cleaned up the ends using our 1-inch belt sander, and then we checked to make sure that all the similar size pieces were in fact the same length. We found a couple that weren't exactly the same, and so we evened them up using the 1-inch belt sander. To get started on our shelves, we used our inside square, laid a 24-inch piece of 5/16 up against it, along with a 12-inch piece of 5/16, and welded the corner together. We then turned those 2 pieces 180 degrees and welded together another pair. That left us 2 welds to finish the main framework. Next, we used our steel ruler to mark where our cross pieces would go. They're spaced 1.5 inches apart and are welded on both ends. Once all of the 3/16 pieces were welded in place, we turned the shelf over, inserted an additional 12-inch piece down the middle, welded the ends, and then made a series of small welds to attach it to the 3/16 rounds. The lower shelf was made in exactly the same manner, and then we were ready to start attaching the legs. With our top shelf turned upside down on our work table, we used the upright square to place our leg and then welded it in place. The 3 other legs were welded on in the same manner. Then we were able to turn the entire assembly upright. Using some steel plates as spacers, we attached the lower shelf. To finish off the project, we used some steel washers at the bottom of the legs for feet. Coming up in a minute, we're going to go over the welding on this project in more detail. We want to move along and look at some of the welds that we did in our plant stand. As we said before, since we're working with much lighter materials, we need to reduce the setting on our welder. We're back at 45 amps. The problem with doing small pieces is you have a hard time getting to where you can get the penetration in both pieces of material without worrying about burning something away. The problem with doing this particular weld is you have to get your electrode into a fairly tight area, strike an arc, and then move back and forth between both pieces of material to make sure you get penetration, and lay down your weld without either getting excess material in there or burning one of the pieces off. What I did was essentially set up a very wide arc against the inside square and then move it down to the 2 pieces we're trying to weld together. I moved fairly rapidly, laying down small amounts of metal and did a very short weld. I've finished welding out our frame, and now we're going to put the smaller cross pieces onto it. We've got a little bit of the same situation. We're putting the smaller bar on top of the larger, which kind of ends us up with a sharp situation here. What I'm going to do is strike the arc here on the small end of the bar and weld it off by melting it, and then penetrate into the larger bar to make the weld. As you can see, doing small, delicate welds can be much harder than doing some of the larger welds we'll be doing in other projects. You just need a little bit of practice, don't get frustrated, and before too long you'll be doing this type of weld easily. Our next simple project is going to be a wine rack. Because it's a decorative item that you'll find in many homes, it's something that we're going to do several times. This is going to be the simplest one that we'll do. We've moved all of our tools off of our work table in order that we can do our layout over there. I've started by laying an upright line from which we'll lay out everything. I'm using my soapstone because that's going to show up best on this steel, and if I make a mistake, it's very easy to go back and rub it out and redo it. I know I want my baseline to be 1 inch off the bottom to keep the wine rack from sitting all the way down flat wherever we put it, so I'm going to mark that 1 inch line all the way across the bottom. I did a brief sketch before and decided that about 10 inches of inside dimension is what we wanted for the total wine rack. My bottom piece is 3/8, so I'm going to mark 10 3/8 up from my baseline. And then once again I'll carry that line all the way across. Our wine rack's going to be based on a 45-degree angle in some areas, so what we want to do is take that 10-inch measurement that we just did and duplicate it times 2 across the top. We can then take our square and mark out our other side. Now I marked the middle as we went along, and I'm going to mark a 45-degree angle. Going in both directions. That shows you our basic layout. I'm going to check it real quick by marking out what how the bottles are going to sit. Instead of welding our top 2 corners here, we're going to bend our metal. To set up my bend, I'm going to mark the middle of this piece and then work outwards from there. I'm going to mark 10 inches each direction, and that'll be my base mark for my bend. To create the bend, I'm going to put that mark right at the edge of the vise. Now I'm going to take a piece of square tube, just slightly bigger than my round piece, put it over the piece of round. I'm going to use this to control, make sure I don't curve this other piece, and I simply bend it around. The second bend's a little bit more difficult, only because we want to make sure that it is perpendicular to the other one. And we'll take and slide our piece of square tube over it and bend. That looks good. That's one piece of our wine rack frame. We'll make another one just like it. And there's the second one. Now I can mark the actual length that I want my legs to be, and I'll trim them off. Okay, the next thing that we want to cut is our lower cross piece. Now up until now we've only been doing square butted joints. What I'm going to do on this one is cut the other piece of round a little bit long, then I'm going to use my file to make a concave grind on the end to make these pieces fit together better. I've laid the leg back on my piece of steel, and I'm actually going to measure up close to the bend to determine how long my piece needs to be. And it looks like we're looking for 20 5/8 of an inch. There's one, and I'll use it to mark the second one. While we've got our vise set up, we might as well go ahead and cut the rest of our pieces. We're going to need 3 pieces that will hold the 2 frames apart from each other about this distance apart. And why don't we make those 4.5 inches. Okay, that's all 3 of our little cross pieces. Now what we want to do is go ahead and weld on our bottom pieces so that we can then lay out our angles. We'll just set this down on the ground for a minute. Move our frames over here. We'll go ahead and mark up 1 inch on each leg. And then put our cross piece in just below that mark. Okay, our cross pieces will go from the middle of the top all the way down here into the corner. Let's check and see how that's going to fit. Well, all of our 45-degree angle pieces are cut now. We can weld them in, and then we'll weld in the 3 pieces that space our 2 frames apart, and we'll essentially be done with this project. We cut 3 4.5-inch pieces to space our frames apart. One will go up here in the middle, the other 2 will come where the legs and the cross pieces come together. I just barely welded that on there. Once we get everything put together, we'll make sure we're square, and then we can weld them better. Okay, that finishes out the last of our welds. Like I said, we put in our 4.5-inch pieces with a light weld, moved everything around till we got it back to where it was all square and sitting down on the table nice and flat, then we welded everything out. This is what it's supposed to do. We're going to set this project aside along with our boot scraper and our plant stand, and in our next episode we're going to concentrate on cleaning them up and finishing them. Weekend Welder is part of the YouTube channel of 8FD Designs in Decatur, Texas. If you're interested in more of this content, subscribe to our channel and watch some of our other videos. 8FD Designs operates out of 32,000 square feet of buildings on 3.5 acres in Decatur, Texas. If you're interested in our markets, our store, our classroom, or taking a look at our various workshops, come and see us in Decatur, Texas.